in one of her spiritual communities she was a part of, they had this saying that if you want to know if you've reached enlightenment, spend some time with your family of origin. because a lot of those established patterns tend to come out. And that's kind of what this presentation is about, is talking about helping us recognize what are those patterns and how can we set ourselves up for success during the holidays so our 15-year-old self doesn't hijack the experience. And a little bit about myself, as Bre already shared, my name is Melissa Ryan. My pronouns are she and hers, hers. And I'm a licensed professional counselor. I've had a private practice for about 3 years, specializing in couples and relationship counseling. And I use a lot of different methodologies and practices. During this time, I've really relied a lot on somatic, some of my somatic training, and really helping people get in the body, and then shifting their somatic experience of their partner and family member, and really working with building either new neural pathways or accessing those neural pathways of wellness and that experience in the body. And so that is going to show up in my presentation today, because I find that it's really helpful, and it has probably been the most powerful tools that I have used personally in terms of shifting my relationships and how I show up in the world. So, and it also has been really helpful for my clients. So I think it's helpful to have, this is so fun reading everyone, Christmas movies, singing meaningful conversation, sharing a meal, Christmas tree, 80s Christmas cartoons. Oh, those are classics. So yeah, our game plan, just so you guys have an idea of what to expect. My goal is to do about 45 minutes of content and then leave some time for questions. And just looking at the time, I'll be mindful of that so we have time for Q&A. So I just was going to go over our working agreement. Because this is a space that we're sharing, please feel free to add anything in the chat that I might not cover as far as creating a space where we feel open and ready to share. Then I'm just going to talk briefly about what I consider the current relational environment and looking more big picture, and then relate it to us individuals and our own, internal family system, and how we integrate and work with those parts inside are the same relational skills that we then take to our external relationships, which is really great, because that means you don't have to learn a whole new skill set, right? Like, you can take what you already have and probably what you already do with clients and people in your life, and just hone that skill set in terms of how you're relating to your 15-year-old self. And then also in terms of how you're relating to family members or loved ones that might be pushing your buttons. So we're going to go global and then go local. And then I'm just going to talk about some other tools that I use for managing energy and stress at this time, and how that relates to working with the 15-year-old self. And I think somebody might not have their mute on. If you could, I'm hearing a little background noise. Mute yourself, that would be great. And then we're going to do a somatic activity because that's important. And I think it really helps us connect with those parts of ourselves. And then discuss a little bit about influence of habits, and we'll probably be out of time. And I like this picture because it reminds me of what I'm going to talk about in terms of the mindset that I like to bring to these presentations, which is an adventure mindset. So my partner is pointing into a trail in Steamboat, Fish Creek Falls. It's very intense. And it's helpful to know, where are we going to head? And what intentions are you bringing to this presentation? What are you hoping to get out of it? And if I don't touch on something that you were hoping to get out of, please put it in the chat, or we can touch on it in the Q&A. But I really think it's helpful to know, like, what are we trying to get out of this experience? What are your intentions? And being mindful of that. And what are the tools that will help you get the most out of your time being on this presentation? So let's continue. So our working agreement for our time together. This may seem obvious, but it's not counseling. This is meant to be psychoeducation. So just keep that in mind. And what I've already discussed is bringing an adventure mindset. And so I invite my clients and those in my life to bring this type of mindset to what we're doing, because I really believe it allows us to be open and feel like we're on a journey together, because I really do believe this time is a journey, and what could we get out of it, and how can we access creativity. And there's a lot more excitement and vitality when it feels like an adventure versus like, I don't know, that I'm going to watch a class or sit through a lecture. That sounds really boring to me. But if I feel like I'm going to be on an adventure and I'm going to expand my consciousness and horizon, that feels very different. And how I show up is differently. And one of the components is this idea of being safe enough, right? So when I go out in the wilderness, and I do a lot of outdoor adventure sports, I'm not entirely safe, but I'm doing my best to be safe enough. And that's what I invite my clients. I'm like, you're not going to learn if you're totally safe, right? Another professor would say, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning. There is a component of learning that has a lot of discomfort that goes along with it, or growing pains. And one of the greatest adventures, I think, is learning more about myself and the different parts of myself and how I integrate that. So my invitation is that you feel safe enough and to manage what that is. And so at any point when I invite you to do an activity or answer a question, you can pass, right? So that's about creating boundaries and making sure you're within that realm to show up as fully as you can. So I'm going to encourage you to take care of yourself. If you need to go to the bathroom, right, you can just like turn off your screen and leave. Have snacks, water. I have all these things at my disposal because I know that if I don't manage my own nervous system and my own ecosystem, I'm not going to show up very well. And I sometimes use curse words. It doesn't always happen, but I just wanted to put that out there. My first job experiences were working construction, and that forever has shaped my worldview. So if it comes out and you're offended, just let me know. So we will continue on. So as I kind of just want to give context to how I'm seeing the relational environment, and then we're going to take it to the micro of what that means about our 15-year-old self. So as many of you are seeing and probably experiencing record high levels of stress. For another presentation, I was doing some research on what's come out from the APA and other researchers regarding high levels of stress, and they're reporting record levels of stress this year compared to previous years. Really makes sense, right? And then we're also, for any of you who've watched The Social Dilemma, and if you haven't, I highly encourage it, there's a lot of discussion about this increased division and how the way social media and our access to phones are really increasing the division amongst us, right? And it's reinforcing, there's an element of confirmation bias. Like if we're seeking out certain information, we continue to get more and more of that. And it takes us down this rabbit hole to the point that we feel so different from others who are promoting different opinions. And it might feel like at such a core level that we disagree and don't have the same values. And while that may be true, one of the thoughts I have and why I really want to have a conversation about this is we still all are on this planet together. And from my point of view, we, especially those in this field, have the tools and skills to start bridging the gap and helping reduce the division we face. And I believe one of the best ways we can bring about social justice is by showing up in our relationships wholeheartedly and with loving firmness. And that's having fierce boundaries and also compassion and love, and being able to separate people are worthy of love and compassion, because all living things are worthy of love and compassion, but we can really be firm and hold people accountable for their actions, and being able to tease that out. So, and that's even the same for ourselves, right? When our 15-year-old self hijacks a situation, we might not be stoked on that, and we might need to hold ourselves accountable for what has transpired when our 15-year-old self is driving the bus, and how do we still hold ourselves in warm regard. So that's going to be a piece of what we unpack. So one of the components that I'm seeing that's really necessary is an increased need to nurture our own resiliency, right? So we have the ACE study, adverse childhood experiences, and we can look at what happens when children experience these significant events, these significant stressful events, and then we can look at outcomes in adulthood. Another component of that study, and studies like the ACE, is the resiliency factors. How do we increase people's resiliency factors? And I've narrowed it down to kind of two categories where you can really put your focus. One is self-worth, how you feel about yourself, your own sense of optimism, how you're managing your own ecosystem. And I like using the word ecosystem because I learned, I don't know, in the last couple of years, this term biome, and I've come to realize through the research of biologists that we have all this bacteria inside and outside of us that's not ours. It's just like this bacteria that helps our immune system function. And so in a sense, we are managing our own ecosystem. And so self-care to me, I don't know, that's kind of a heated word or a loaded term in our culture, in our field. And so I'm like, I'm not even going to touch that really, and really just think about how do I care for this ecosystem that I embody? How do I care, provide nourishment? Because when we're not nourished, we're much more likely to get hijacked by the 15-year-old or other parts of ourselves. So one of the ways to increase our resiliency, right, is to beef up our sense of self-worth and how we're taking care of our internal environment. And the other piece is through connection. Connection is so huge, right? A lot of us might work in the field of addiction and recovery. I myself have supported a lot of couples and families in this arena. And, you know, Johan Hari's term that he coined, that the opposite of addiction is connection. And so a lot of this healing and resiliency that I see needing to take place because of stress and the increased division really is going to come through our connection with others and our connection with ourselves. So I'm going to keep coming back to that because it's really important. And so as I was already saying, how do you separate the person from the behavior? One of my clients, they're doing some family work and trying to heal on their end some ways of their relating. And my question that I posed to them was, what does loving firmness look like? And then they made a face and talked about how they relate to their children, how they provide loving firmness. It's like, I love you, but I don't love what you're doing, just in a face. And I was like, well, how can you bring that to other people in your life? How can you lovingly, but be firm? And how can you bring that to yourself of like, hey, self, that self-sabotaging behavior is not that helpful. I love you. And how can I be firm with you that like a change needs to take place? A saying that I took from another supervisor is that it comes from talking about kids and teens, and I think it applies to all people. People don't care what you know until they know you care. And I would even say that about our parts of ourselves. If we're trying to make friends with this 15-year-old part of ourself, our adaptive child, it doesn't really care what our higher self has to say until it knows that we care about it and we're not judging it, right? If you've ever worked with teenagers, which I did a lot of work with prior to specializing in couples, I could click with just about any teenager because my whole goal was just to like click with the person. And if they knew that I cared about who they were and I wasn't judging them for their action, then they were open to influence and learning about different ways they might handle the situation. Gary Landreth, who's a child-centered play therapist, has an expression saying, which I'm probably going to butcher, which is not focusing on the kind of problem the child has, but what kind of child does the problem have? And I like that idea, right? So reversing that, and we can bring that to ourselves. Like when we're struggling, it's not, I like the language of saying I have depressive symptoms versus I have depression, or I am this. It's like, you might be dealing with these things. How can you tease that out even for yourself? I find that empowering. And as I was already mentioning, why I'm bringing this to the forefront is I really believe that when we can be a grounding and loving influence, we are doing social justice work. And I really see a huge need for that and bringing people together. And the other piece I put is, and being mindful about how you allocate your energy and attention. There might be a person, I mean, I do this in all my relationships of like, do I have the capacity to be present for them and try to exercise influence? And is that a good use of my time? Or is that person really just stuck And the best thing I can do is kind of lovingly detach from that and just be a loving presence. And when they're ready or open, then maybe we can have a conversation, and always gauging that, because that can shift. And another thing that I bring, and again, this relates to our 15-year-old selves and making that relationship, is this concept that Stephen Covey talked about, which is seek first to understand and then be understood. And so, really coming back to that when we're around our loved ones, is it can be really difficult, because you might be like, I don't understand why they would even have this. This like feels so immoral or against human rights or a whole host of things. And if people feel understood, again, they're much more likely to be open, and they'll let their defenses down. And then you actually have an opportunity to influence them and share some things, but they aren't going to be there until they know that you care and that you understand where they're coming from. And it's the same with the parts inside of us. So all that to say, let's get in the body. and then we're going to do another activity. So you might have been doing things beforehand. You might be doing things afterwards. And I'm going to invite us to just collect, be in the present moment. I'm going to lead us in just 3 deep breaths. We're going to do cleansing breaths. If you've ever been in yoga, where you breathe through the nose and then you breathe out through the mouth, and you can make an audible sound. And it's just to release anything that might be stored in there. So I'm going to lead you. You can close your eyes or not, and we're just going to do that, and then we'll continue. So with the first breath, breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. And then your second one, go ahead and breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. And one more time, breathe in through the nose. And so just noticing if anything arose in you. I'm talking about a bunch of different things, and just being present. And I'm going to invite us to continue to return to that, because the presence is where we can tap into that inner wisdom, that really grounded sense of self. And that's so key in relationships. So a component, since we're already talking about the ecosystem, concept I want to bring to the forefront is just thinking about how you're managing your energy. And I like the concept of the video life bar game, because most people at some point have played some sort of video game. And as you may know, in a video game, you're playing and you do things, and some things might take away from your life bar and some things might increase it. And that's the case with us every day. We wake up and hopefully we've had a restful sleep and our life bar is totally full. And then we go throughout our day, and there are things that increase our energy. It could be nourishment, activity outside, talking with a loved one. And then there are things that can reduce our energy. And something I garnered from a counselor who I went to because I felt like I had workaholic behaviors and I wanted to really address it, is something she said is, Melissa, practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. And the habits you have every day is the life you're living. And I was like, well, I hate my habits. I don't have any energy. I'm depleted by the weekend. And then I have to sleep the whole time. And then I start back up over. And so one of the things I really worked with her on is managing my energy throughout the day. And my goal every day is that I end the day with just as much energy as I started with. And I feel really good if I go to bed with more energy than I started with. That doesn't always happen. And there are days that I'm still drained, but I'm mindful of that. I'm thinking throughout the day, where is that life bar? Where do I need to recharge? And the reason I bring this up is when we're talking about going into the holidays, one of the best ways you can set yourself up for success is checking in with that life bar and knowing where you're at before you go into that situation. Because what I talk with my clients about is, especially with couples, by the time they see each other at the end of the day, they're in that flashing red zone, which in a video game means you're about to die. That's not so great. And then they try to have a conversation about their relationship. And no surprise, it doesn't go well, right? Because they need that extra energy, right? When our life bar is full and our partner does something that we normally would find annoying, it might not take us down very much, but if our life bar is very depleted and we're in that flashing red zone and they do that same seemingly annoying thing, then that can become a fight or a conflict. And so a lot about, taking care of our 15-year-old self and not having it hijack is just about how we're managing that life bar energy. And when we're going into the holidays, what are going to be the things and habits I need to have in place so that I'm not in that flashing red zone? Because if I'm in that flashing red zone, what that means is my body is going to rely on survival responses. And a lot of that adaptive child is based on survival responses. It's how we survived the environment, our family of origin, and it's very much wired in our nervous system. And so if our nervous system, if our whole ecosystem is feeling depleted, it goes into a different mode. And the mode it goes into, and in video games, this happens too, right? Or your phone does this. It goes into survival where you can't use as much data, and it slows everything down. And that's how we are. We're in this survival space, and it's really hard for us to be present and to have that influence for anyone because we're so depleted. And so this is one tool and one way to think. And I think about it throughout the day. I mean, even before I started this presentation, I was like, oh, like I feel a little depleted. I had a session with a client who's dealing with lots of trauma and systemic stuff. And so I was feeling that, and I'm an empathetic person, so I know that. And so I was like, how do I move through this? How do I increase my energy? And so it's a tool I use a lot of the time. Another component model that I want to bring up is some of you might know this cycle of habit that came from The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And I've used this a lot with clients around addiction. And it's also helpful in terms of understanding relational habits, right? So what I was getting at with our adaptive child and those survival responses is that there are cues in our environment, right? So in terms of our energy bar, that could be an internal cue, right? If I'm depleted, there might be a certain routine that's survival based that happens when I'm depleted, and it leads to a sense of relief, or that could be the reward, or, reestablishing safety or control, all kinds of things. There's also these types of habits that are in play in all of our relationships, especially long-term relationships. And especially when we're talking about really long-standing relationships. And so, I've worked with clients who are like, we have really good habits with talking with one another as a couple, and really being on the same page. And then we go to one another's family and it's all out the window. And, I'm looking at my partner and they seem like they're 12 again, and we can't have a serious conversation. What's that all about? Like, why does this happen? And I was like, well, it's the cues in the environment that are so strong and so well established, right? So cues being the people you're around, the time of year, the rituals you're doing, all of that cues your brain and your nervous system to respond in a certain way, to respond in certain routines. And so if you're wanting to not have that, right? If you're like, I don't want my 15-year-old self or 12-year-old self to run the show, then what's key is understanding, well, why did that happen? It's probably, like I said, what the rewards are either maybe safety, relief, a sense of control. There could be a host of reasons of why your 15-year-old self developed those ways of relating. So understanding, okay, what are the rewards? And then how do I intentionally meet those rewards through a different set of habits? How do I attend to that so I can be successful when I see my family? And I'm gonna unpack this a little more, but before that, I really want us to explore the somatic experience of tapping into the 15-year-old self. So I'm gonna lead you in a guided visualization. Does that sound cool? Is everyone with me? Cool. So I have a little video. So we're going to do this visualization has 3 parts to it. And after each part, we'll pause and you'll jot some things down. So if you have your pen and paper handy, that's really great. And as I mentioned, you can feel free to turn off your screen. You can close your eyes. You can let your eyes go soft. For those of you who I've had classmates and clients that really struggle with, you know, staying on track, I'm going to have a visualization so you can watch the screen. It's this, this roaring fire. And if that helps you and you can just listen to my voice, that's totally cool. Just do what feels good. And I'll go ahead and get started. So yeah, if you can get comfortable, usually it's helpful to have both feet on the ground wherever you're seated. I'm standing because I find that more comfortable. And we're just going to settle in, and I'm going to lead you in some breaths and some body scans, and then we'll begin. So just tuning into your breath. As I mentioned, you can close your eyes or not. You can watch the fire on the screen. And I'm just going to invite you to start tuning in with your inhale and your exhale. And just noticing, not controlling it. And then I'm going to invite you to just do a gentle body scan. So we're just going to bring awareness to what's happening in the body. So starting at the top or the crown of your head and just noticing any sensation. And if your mind wanders, gently bring it back to being in the body or watching the fire on the screen. And then just bringing your awareness to your face and noticing any sensation there, any sensation at the back of the head, noticing your neck and your throat area. And bringing awareness to your chest and noticing your heartbeat, if you can tune into the rhythm. And then noticing the back of your neck all the way down to your spinal cord. And noticing any sensation along this information highway. And when your mind wanders, or if you feel the need to move, go ahead. Just we're creating space for the body to feel what it needs to feel. And then bringing awareness to your shoulders, all the way down your arms to your fingertips. And bringing awareness to your breath again, your lungs as they expand and they fall. Noticing your digestive system, processing nutrients and bringing nourishment throughout the body. Bringing awareness to the pelvic bowl, which holds all our major organs. There's also a center of creativity. Just bringing awareness there, tuning into your energetic core that helps you stabilize and have balance and movement. Bringing awareness to your hips and your glutes. Awareness in your legs, all the way down to your feet. And just noticing how sensation moves, if your temperature is changing. And holding the whole body in your awareness. And once you have a good felt sense of the body, I'm going to invite you to bring forth an image of a recent memory you had with another person or a group of people where you just felt either relax or joy or peace. It's this really warm memory. And bring that into your mind. And notice the colors, the textures, what you were doing with this other person or this group of people. Maybe you weren't doing anything. And just notice, what is it like being in this memory where you feel connected, where you feel care, affection, and allow that to fill the whole body. Take in the sounds, any tastes, any smells. Just breathe that in and notice what that's like in the body, and allow that to settle in. And notice any changes or expansion of sensation. And taking a few more deep breaths to be with that experience of connection. Might be pets or other loving animals in the scene. You can include them too. And once you have a really good sense of that, I'm going to invite you to briefly open your eyes and jot down any sensations. And I'm going to give you a list if you're like, I don't know what to think about. So just jot down. We're only going to spend 30 seconds on this, and then we're going to jump back into the visualization. So I'll give you 15 more seconds just to notice what it was like to be in that space. And then once you're done, go ahead and close your eyes or get back into your space. And I'm going to lead you in a different visualization. So closing your eyes or letting your eyes go soft. We have a different video you can watch of an outdoor space. And we're going to tune back into the breath. And just notice again what it feels like in the body. Briefly pause. Now we're returning to the present moment. Connecting with the breath. And this time, I'm going to invite you to think about a moment of challenge with a loved one, a close friend. That's recent. And on a scale of 1 to 5, choose something that's a 2 or a 3. And really get in your mind's eye what this moment was like. What was said, not said. Feel your body being in that moment. Maybe something was said that was hurtful or done that was hurtful, and feel how the body responds. Notice the colors, textures, sounds. What is it like being in this memory and feeling the rush of whatever this tension is, this conflict, this situation? And notice that there might be a part that's hurt. And where's that in the body? Maybe disappointment. And then notice the part of the body that wants to respond, that wants to make a point, that maybe wants to withdraw. The part that wants to be active to whatever just happened. And notice where that is in the body and how that feels. Once you have a clear sense of that response and how the body's changing, I'm going to invite you again to open your eyes and jot down what you notice. And I'll give you some words. So I'll just take a few more seconds. I've got some words here that you might notice. And we're going to re-enter and do part 3. So when you're ready, go ahead and put your writing implement down. Close your eyes again. Got another video for us. And go ahead and tune back into the body. Tune back into the breath. And close your eyes. You can watch the video we have on the screen. Just notice, again, tuning in where you are in that energetic core, what it feels like in the body. And then I'm going to invite you to return to that first part, that first memory. So bring into your mind's eye that moment of connection and warmth, care, affection. Bring that memory back into the mind and allow that to fill the body to feel that sense of connection and what that's really like in this place. And then once you have a really good sense of that, I'm going to invite you to think about that moment of challenge, that moment of conflict, and bring that back into the body. And then noticing how the two parts, the parts of connection and warmth, and the part of conflict and disconnection, notice how they are relating or not relating. And kind of bouncing between the two, returning to the moment of warmth and connection, and then shifting to the moment of conflict and tension, and then back to the warmth and connection. and titrating and just noticing, how does the body respond? What is that connection or lack of connection between those two moments? And if you get distracted, just come back to the body and the breath. So just titrating from the moment of connection to the moment of disconnection and continuing to track how the body responds. Let's just take a few more deep breaths with that. And then when you're ready, open your eyes. Jot down what you notice. And then we're going to have a shift into a group participation. So I'm going to invite you to open up slido.com. And if you type in the code 799, I'm going to invite you to share at least one sensation that showed up during those different parts of the visualization. And it's just a way to see how we all experience things and what shows up in the vast sensation experience. So the code again is 7599. And I'm going to open it up because I want to see what's happening. So again, just enter in a sensation you notice, and we'll see what manifests with the group. Huh. That's very strange. Did it show up for you guys? Are you seeing? Bre, are you seeing it? Because it looked weird on my end.
Yeah, I'm seeing a screen that says type your question. Is that
yeah,
right?
Yeah, no. it should like be like you enter the word. So I don't know what happened. Some sort of like we were just talking about the integration. Something is weird. So I think we'll just skip it. So never mind. If you want to, you could share in the chat. It's a really cool feature that should populate, but I don't know why it's not working. So if you would like to share in the chat something you notice, it was just a fancy way to do that. And just being mindful of time, I guess I'll continue. So yeah, if you'd like to share what you notice in the sensation, that's great. We can learn a little bit about that. And I guess we'll just move on. So the next part I wanted to just talk about in terms of that part that reacted, right? So I invited you to kind of step into a place where you feel resourced in relationships, because that's huge, right? If we can nurture that and really be mindful of that, that is so helpful in terms of going into the holidays, especially if there's a person of challenge, right? So something that I like to remind myself is Gottman's research of ratio, that we need 5 positive interactions for every not so positive interaction. And that's a really big ratio. And for a lot of relationships, especially with what's going on, they might feel very out of balance. So I talk a lot. I see somebody I know. Hey. So I talk a lot about with clients how to cultivate those positive feelings. And sometimes you might be like, well, we haven't had a positive interaction for a very long time. And so one of the ways is to go back and really like remember those positive experiences, because if you're stuck in negative sentiment override, it's really hard for a relationship to move forward. So that's one component. The other component that I invited you to do in the visualization was to notice the part of you that didn't feel good when there was disconnection, when there was conflict. And typically there are 2 parts of us, I would say, if we were going to simplify this, that are being triggered in a conflict. There's the wounded child part of us that like feels hurt and that usually wants to crawl into a little ball. Then there's the adaptive child, or our 15-year-old self. And that's the part of it that I was inviting you to connect with. Like, where is that in the body? And that part I often think about is like the big sister, right? So our wounded child gets hurt by something somebody says, doesn't say, the environment. And then our big sister part of us, or our big brother, or our big older sibling wants to respond and have that action. And it's so helpful to know where that is in the body, and then also to name it. So like for myself, I identified when I was younger with Julia Stiles' character from 10 Things I Hate About You. I just really identify. She's the oldest sibling. I'm the oldest sibling. She thinks she knows everything. I still think I know everything. And then I'm like, oh, that's my adaptive child, right? And like, look at her face. It's like so perfect. I'm pretty sure I gave that face to my parents on a regular basis. And I give that face sometimes to my partner, as he's pointed out to me. And so it's really helpful to be able to name that. And for me, if I have like a character, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm totally being hijacked. Julia Stiles in the movie, it's Kat Strafford, is hijacking the situation. And that's who's responding to my parents and trying to make a point. And so it's my invitation for you, if you feel compelled to, is to identify some character or some way of being able to name that and give it a personality. Because if you can name it, you can tame it, but you also know how to work with it. Like, what would my 15-year-old self need to be successful and not hijack? As we were talking about with the power of habit, right? There are cues in the environment that are going to lead to this 15-year-old part of myself showing up. So I have thought about like, what are ways that I can care for that 15-year-old part of myself ahead of time, and also during my time with family of origin. And the biggest piece being what I talked about before. People don't care what you know until they know you care. So I just had a client that's been doing some internal family systems work, and they were trying to connect with their adaptive child. And they're like, well, they're not, he's not paying attention to me. And I was like, well, probably because you've ignored him for a long time. So he needs to know that you care. And that's how you start, is just keep showing up and be like, okay, I'm going to listen and I'm going to attune to what you're saying. And even though, you may have caused harm, right? Like, our adaptive child is not relational. It's meant to help us survive, or it's definitely not advanced relational, right? Like my 15-year-old cat, well, she's like 17 in the movie, which just shows that I thought I was older than I was. That part of me is just helping me survive, but she's not very relational. She learns those skills in the movie. And that's the same with the 15-year-old part of me. It's survival. It's how I'm managing the environment. So because she's not relational, I don't want her running the show. She might have some good ideas. She might be creative, but she can't be in charge. And so how can I take care of her instead of like trying to have others take care of her for me? Another component that you might consider is to write a SFD, a shitty first draft, as Brene Brown talks about, to a person or people who wronged the 15-year-old, as a way to kind of release anything that going into the holidays is remaining. And it could be old shit, but it could be new stuff, right? Like, there has been a lot of conversations happening and conflicts and division happening like just this year. And that stuff could have wounded that 15-year-old part of ourselves. And so before going into the holidays, if we're like, well, I don't know if resolution is going to happen, you're definitely going to be in a different space for resolution and to help facilitate that if you're not carrying resentment and anger and rage. And so if you write an SFD to the person that's wronged the 15-year-old from the perspective of the 15-year-old, you have the potential to release that. Another way to care for that 15-year-old that I really love, as I shared with Bre, that I just did before I got on this call, is to dance it out. I love the 5 rhythms because it helps us release things intentionally. But any sort of dancing can be a way to really tap into that younger part of ourselves and release what might be stored in there. And then I put break some shit intentionally in a safe way, right? Like, there's a Japanese practice that I did with another counselor facilitated, where you break this bowl and then you glue it back together and you paint the cracks with gold. It's super cool. And it's a way, that whole process can be a real way to release and process and be intentional and mindful I'm listening to Tosha Silver, and she talks about how she buys plates at Goodwill and then just breaks them and how that's really therapeutic. That can be a way to get rid of that 15-year-old angst, right? And rage. She also uses the practice of smashing coconuts. Really want to do that one. I haven't done that. I think that'd be really fun. Another component as a way to care for that 15-year-old self is to just incorporate self-care in your schedule during the holidays. So I talk with my couples, I talk with my own partner about how can we set ourselves up for success with all the different family dynamics. What are we going to need to have every single day as a way to regroup both individually and then as a team? And what are we going to have throughout the day as a way to kind of keep us from falling into those old patterns? And then I wrote this as like to create a mentorship relationship with your 15-year-old part of yourself, right? So I did a program similar to Big Brothers Big Sisters, and it's interesting, right? Because you learn from one another, just like you do in any relationship. So how can you learn what your 15-year-old has to say, create space for it, and integrate it? And then I was going to say, if other people have other ideas, feel free to share, because I know there's lots of insight and wisdom in this space, and I love learning too. So I think that's going to put us at about time. Oh, I thought this was funny. It says the past self, finding it can be shocking. And I feel like that's true. So that's kind of, oh, and then I included as a reminder, like what got me into this work in the first place, which was a response to my parents' divorce over a decade ago, and like how far we've come. Like these are Zoom calls or Facebook chats, I guess, with different, both my parents, and we're being playful and having fun, and how that's so crucial, like building up that emotional bank account, that connection, those positive feelings, so that you can have difficult conversations. How critical that is, right? Like we're just cracking up and having a great time. And that's so huge. And it might seem like, no, we got to talk about these hard things and we got to do this difficult work. And it's like, yes. And it's so much easier to do that difficult work if you have this sense of like, we're connected, we love each other. And because we love each other, we want to have these difficult conversations so that our relationships are better. So that's all I have. Any questions, comments?